In the spring of 2007, a wildlife biologist named Dan Roper waded into a drainage ditch in the Blackfoot Valley of western Montana and pulled out a handful of mud. He held it up, turned it over, and set it back down without saying anything. Around him, 12,000 acres of former wetland stretched in every direction, or what had once been wetland. What Roper was standing in now was a series of drained agricultural fields, compacted soil, and irrigation channels that had been cut to move water off the land as fast as possible. The sky above him held no birds. A colleague standing nearby asked what he was thinking. He said, "This is what a landscape looks like when it has forgotten what it is supposed to be." What happened in that valley over the next decade would force scientists, ranchers, engineers, and policymakers to reconsider something they had believed for a century. That drained land is productive land. That wetlands are waste. That the right way to manage water is to move it away. The Blackfoot Valley would prove every one of those assumptions wrong. Not gradually, not through careful incremental data, but through something that happened in the third year of restoration that no monitoring plan had predicted and no model had projected. To understand what the Blackfoot Valley became, you have to understand what it was before the draining started, and how completely that original landscape had been erased. Those wetlands supported waterfowl in numbers that early settlers recorded in journals with language that now reads like exaggeration, clouds, carpets, the kind of abundance that modern ecologists call a baseline, and quietly note they have never actually seen. By 1950, the Blackfoot Valley had lost an estimated 90% of its original wetland acreage. By 1980, the figure was higher. Landowners who had been farming in the valley for generations could describe, if you asked them, what their grandparents had seen. The birds, the ponds, the spring flooding that used to spread for miles. But the landscape those grandparents described had been so completely restructured that most people looking at the valley in 1990 would have had no idea anything was missing. That is the particular danger of a landscape drained over multiple generations. The loss becomes invisible because no one alive has seen what was there before. The baseline shifts. What is broken begins to look like what is normal. Dan Roper knew the original baseline. He had spent years studying historical vegetation surveys, aerial photography going back to the 1930s, and early conservation records documenting what the valley had once held. When he stood in that ditch in 2007, looking at 12,000 acres of compacted, drained, birdless agricultural land, he was not seeing what everyone else saw. He was seeing 12,000 acres of what a functioning wetland system looks like when you remove the water. What made the Blackfoot restoration different from most large-scale wetland projects was that it was not a government takeover. The ranchers who owned and operated the land stayed in control of it. The project was built on voluntary easements and collaborative agreements. Landowners who signed on were not selling their property. They were agreeing to allow hydrological restoration on portions of their land, receiving funding for the work, and, in some cases, compensation for reduced agricultural productivity. The hydrological work began in 2008. Engineers mapped the network of drainage ditches cut across the valley floor over the previous century, and began the slow process of understanding how each one connected to the others and to the main river system. Some ditches were filled, others were fitted with control structures that allowed managers to regulate water levels seasonally. Tile drains installed decades earlier were plugged. Channels that had been straightened to speed drainage were given back their curves. The water had nowhere to go but back onto the land. In the first year, the results were predictable. Fields that had been dry began holding water. The soil, compacted over decades, took time to absorb it. Some areas that managers had intended as shallow seasonal wetlands became deeper than anticipated because the drainage infrastructure had been removed faster than the ground could adjust. The hydrology was messier than the models. The birds did not come. This was expected. Wetland plant communities take years to establish. The invertebrate populations that form the base of waterfowl food webs take time to colonize new habitat. The word used most often by the team in year one was patience. In the second year, vegetation began to establish in newly flooded areas. Sedges and bulrushes appeared along the margins of deeper water. Smartweed emerged in mudflats where levels dropped in late summer. Willows began regenerating along restored stream corridors. Earthworm counts increased. Macroinvertebrate samples from the newly established shallow water showed early colonization by aquatic insects. The midges and mayflies and caddisflies that waterfowl chicks depend on in their first weeks of life. Still no significant bird numbers. The monitoring team logged their data and kept walking transects. Then came the spring of 2010. Dan Roper was conducting an early morning waterfowl survey in late April when his count stopped making sense. He was using a standardized point count protocol, stationary at a survey station, recording every waterfowl individual within 200 meters. He had used this protocol hundreds of times. He ran the count 3 times at his first station before moving on, because the numbers were too high to record with confidence. When the full spring survey was compiled, the data showed something that the project's own documents describe with notable restraint, given what the numbers actually represented. Mallard pairs had increased by 640% across the restoration area compared to the pre-restoration baseline survey from 2006. Blue-winged teal, a species not recorded nesting in the valley for 2 decades, had returned in sufficient numbers that 3 confirmed nesting sites were documented in the first season. Canvasback, a diving duck requiring deep, clear, emergent vegetation-fringed water, appeared in the newly established wetland complexes in numbers that meant the habitat had reached ecological function the team had not projected until at least year 5. Sandhill cranes, which had not staged in the valley in meaningful numbers for generations, appeared in April of 2010 in a group of 23 individuals. They used the wetlands for 2 weeks before continuing north. The biologists went back and looked at the baseline numbers again, then at their habitat maps, then at each other. The habitat established by spring 2010 was 2 years old. It was young wetland, early succession. The vegetation structure was not the complex, multi-layered, decades-developed habitat that published literature suggested diving ducks and colonial water birds typically required before establishing breeding populations. None of that matched what the data was showing. The explanation came from something wetland restoration ecologists had documented in prairie pothole systems, but had not yet applied as a predictive framework to the Northern Rockies context. Waterfowl are not passive colonizers. They survey landscapes actively. Migrating birds, particularly dabbling ducks and shorebirds, track water across large geographic areas each spring, reading the visual and structural cues that wetland landscapes produce. Open, shallow water, emergent vegetation at the margins, the structural complexity that signals invertebrate abundance and nesting opportunity. The Blackfoot Valley had been a dead zone in that search image for nearly a century. Birds passing over it in migration found nothing, so they passed over it, year after year, generation after generation, and the behavioral recognition of the valley as usable habitat faded from the population. When the water came back, the landscape re-entered the search image, not slowly, immediately. The birds that arrived in 2010 were not the offspring of gradual recolonization. They were migrants that had been flying over a dead valley for years and had suddenly found, in the same airspace, a landscape that warranted a closer look. They descended, they stayed. Some of them nested. Then the beaver question arrived in 2011. A project hydrologist reviewing aerial photography of a restored side channel in the northern section of the project area noticed a structure in the channel that had not been there in the previous year's imagery. 8 meters long, built from willow and cottonwood cuttings. It had raised the water level in the side channel by approximately 40 centimeters. No one had put it there. The Blackfoot Valley had not supported a significant beaver population on the valley floor for decades. The drainage infrastructure had made it unsuitable. Beavers require standing water and woody vegetation close to that water. The drained fields offered neither. When the water came back and the willows began to establish along the restored stream banks, the conditions changed. A beaver found them. Then it did what beavers do when they encounter a landscape their engineering can improve. It started building. By 2014, the project area supported an estimated 11 active beaver colonies. The dams those colonies built added to the water retention capacity of the restored system in ways the project's hydrology models had not accounted for. The engineering design had calculated a specific amount of water retention based on the control structure placements and the ditch modifications. That was the number the project reported to funders. The actual water retention in the landscape by 2014, once the Beaver Dam network was incorporated into the measurement, was 34% higher than the designed figure. The beavers had out-engineered the engineers, not because the restoration engineers had made errors, because beavers can respond to local conditions at a resolution no engineering design can replicate, adjusting dam placement in real time, filling gaps in the water retention network that no survey had identified, building structures in locations where no human crew would have thought to place them. The project's lead hydrologist described it in a 2016 paper in the journal Wetlands, with a sentence that has since been cited in restoration planning documents across the western United States. The most cost-effective thing we did in the Blackfoot was create conditions where beavers were willing to come back and do the rest themselves. By 2016, the project had accumulated enough data to produce a full species assessment. Across the 12,000 acres, monitoring documented 247 bird species using the restored wetland complex across a calendar year. Of those, 89 were confirmed breeding species. Before restoration, the 2006 baseline survey had documented breeding by 31 species. That was a 187% increase in breeding bird diversity over 10 years. American bittern, listed as a species of concern by the Montana Natural Heritage Program due to declining statewide populations, was documented breeding in the restoration area. Its booming call, not recorded in the valley in any monitoring log for more than 40 years, was captured on acoustic monitors in spring 2013 and has been recorded every breeding season since. White-faced ibis nested in the restoration area in 2014. The species had no documented nesting record in the Blackfoot Valley. It had been a casual visitor to western Montana, meaning it appeared occasionally and unpredictably. In 2014, it was nesting. River otter returned by 2013 to sections of the Blackfoot River corridor adjacent to the restoration area, connected directly to improvements in water quality downstream of the Beaver Dammed side channel. Mink followed. The food web was assembling itself, each layer producing the conditions the layers above and below required. In the spring of 2017, Dan Roper was walking a monitoring transect in the northern section of the restoration area when he heard a sound he had not expected. It was coming from a dense stand of bulrush in the margin of the largest wetland complex in the project area. He stopped. He listened, the boom of an American bittern. He stood there for a long time, not counting, not recording, just listening to a sound the Blackfoot Valley had not produced for more than 40 years, coming out of a marsh that had not existed 5 years earlier, made by a bird that no one had brought there. The Blackfoot Valley restoration did not prove that humans can rebuild nature. It proved something quieter and harder to hold on to. Nature does not need to be rebuilt. It needs to be given back the conditions it requires. Stop the drainage, restore the water, let the land begin to reassemble itself, and then get out of the way and document what arrives. The 247 bird species, the moose, the beaver colonies, the river otters, the sandhill cranes stopping every April now in a valley they had avoided for a generation. None of them were placed there. None of them were managed into existence. They found a landscape that had recovered the function it had lost and moved back into it the way animals move into habitat that is right for them, without being asked, without knowing what had happened to that land in the century before they arrived, without any awareness that the shallow marsh they were nesting in had been a compacted agricultural field 4 years earlier, or that the willow stand they were stripping for nest material had been a drainage ditch. They found water where there had been none, and vegetation where there had been bare ground, and the invisible biological signals that a functioning wetland broadcasts to every species that evolved alongside one. And they came home. If you are not subscribed yet, and you want to follow what restoration looks like when the data comes back, better than anyone predicted, now is the time. We publish stories like this regularly. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one.